Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. The story I'm going to be telling you guys today is one of my favorite from the Old Republic period. It's a tale of power, fear, betrayal, and conflict, all the usual ingredients for an excellent Star Wars space drama. But what makes this story truly remarkable is how the choices of just a few individuals ripple outward, reshaping the destiny of an entire galaxy in shocking and unexpected ways. This is the butterfly effect at its most devastating. Small decisions rippling outwards, creating galaxy-wide consequences. The Great Sith War of 3996 BBY left a deep scar on the Jedi Order. It was a very traumatic event. Prior to the beginning of the war, the Sith were believed to be extinct, and the escalation of the conflict from a minor Jedi skirmish on Onderon to a galaxy-spanning war with Mandalorians and craft sorcerers appearing seemingly out of nowhere completely shattered people's impression of Jedi Republic control and power. There was also the defection of many Jedi students to the charismatic fallen Jedi Exar Kun. We also have the sacking of the Great Library on Ossus, which led to a great loss of Jedi knowledge and culture. That event actually changed the Jedi Order from a relatively decentralized organization to a organization that was more concentrated on Coruscant. Many of the Jedi who fought in this conflict were unprepared for just how horrific war against the Sith could be. And what I want to focus on today is a Jedi Knight known as Barristan Dre. He was killed in action while leading a Jedi expedition into the Ansari Caverns during the Tabrawa campaign. He would leave behind his wife, another Jedi, Corinda Dre, and their son, Lucian. Now, Corinda was devastated by the loss of her husband, and she partly blamed herself and the many other seers in the Jedi Order for not basically foreseeing the Great Sith War. You know how Yoda's Jedi Order banned attachments and starting families? Well, you're about to see exactly why. Corinda Dre was deeply changed by the death of her husband. She went from a pleasant and optimistic individual to an individual who was always depressed and wallowing in self-pity because of her inability to stop the death of her husband. You see, Corinda Dre was a Jedi counselor, a half-Mirlucan gifted with something known as foresight. This means that she was especially well connected to the Force, and even with her eyes closed, she could easily navigate her surroundings and see things that the naked eye could not. In those days, the Jedi Order would train such gifted individuals to use meditative immersion to essentially find ripples in the Force and shatter points that point towards future events. The Jedi who had this ability were known as seers. And there's individuals like Corinda Dre who were responsible for visions like the Chosen One prophecy with Anakin. And as we all know, Force prophecies were a dangerous game to play because oftentimes these visions were misinterpreted and could lead to fear and chaotic action, which obviously can lead to the dark side or sometimes create self-fulfilling prophecies. After the tragic events of the Great Sith War, Corinda Dre stepped away from the Jedi Order. But with the death of so many seers during the last conflict, the Jedi Order still needed someone with her experience to train the next generation. And so, a lot of Jedi Masters would actually send their students to Corinda Dre for further training and how to view and interpret the ripples in the Force. Corinda Dre would train these students, but she would save the best for her own purposes. You see, she wanted to use their abilities to detect the next great Sith threat. She would enroll these students into a secret organization she founded known as the Jedi Covenant. It existed parallel to the Jedi Order, yet no one in the High Council or the Jedi Enclave knew of its existence. Now, the Jedi Covenant had an entire hidden operation that was partially funded by the Dre estate. I mean, this was a very rich family. You also had the failed Jedi Padawan Hazan, who kind of ran the shadowy operations and logistics of this part of the organization. There were also other members of the Jedi Covenant who were still actively a part of the Jedi Order, including a group known as the Conclave, or the First Watch Circle. These were 5 high-ranking Jedi Masters who, during the day, operated like any other Jedi did in the wider organization, but secretly, their main purpose was watching the horizon for any future Sith threat. And they called the Jedi Tower, otherwise known as the Taris Academy, their home. Now, Taris was one of the most important Outer Rim planets during this period. Located on the Mandalorian Road section of the Hydean Way, it was an early trade hub in the peripherals of the galaxy and home to many Republic business interests. Unlike most of the other planets in this region, Taris was heavily populated and heavily developed. It was like a mini Coruscant, an ecumenopolis with massive amounts of people and massive amounts of wealth. The Jedi Covenant chose the Taris Tower for their first watch circle because of its proximity to the unknown region, which is kind of like where the Sith were generally thought to be. Now, the Jedi Order had established the Taris Jedi Tower in 3976 BBY, specifically in response to the outbreak of the Mandalorian Wars, or the start of the Second Mandalorian Crusade. At the time, the Republic was not technically involved in direct conflict with the Mandalorians, as they had mostly stuck to raiding and invading non-aligned worlds in the Outer Rim. Most of these worlds were of little importance to the Republic because they just had a very small economic footprint, and again, they're not really a part of the Galactic Senate, so there's no political need to actually help these people out. But Taris was a bit different because of its status as an economic hub. And so the Republic would actually grant Taris membership status to the Republic in 3966, and they would establish a defensive cordon around the system. The planet would serve as a logistics center for all Republic Navy assets in the sector. Basically, the Republic was drawing a line in the sand here. They were kind of worried about the Mandalorians. They weren't willing to, antagonize them too much, but if they attacked Taris, then the full-blown war would actually happen between these two factions. Now, Mandalore the Ultimate at the time was still building up his forces, and, the Neo-Crusader movement was rapidly modernizing the logistical capabilities of his Mandalorian army, and also standardizing the training and equipment of his troops. And so he was kind of biding his time as well. He's a bit different from previous Mandalorian leaders. He was definitely a lot more strategic. The Mandalorians gradually started taking worlds next to Taris over, and they continued to probe Republic defenses. They started getting engaged in skirmishes with Republic forces. Mandalore the Ultimate was basically still testing out different strategies and trying to gather as much information about how his foe fought. The hope here was to lure the Republic Navy out into the open on the Mandalorians' terms and defeat them in some major battle that could really turn the tide of the conflict. The small raids and attacks were really designed to test response times and military readiness in the local sector and the Republic's tactical preferences. Now, the Jedi Conclave on Taris was made up of 4 very powerful seers trained by Crinda Dre, and her son Lucian Dre made up the 5th member. He served as the hand for the group, which simply meant that he protected the group and overlooked their mission and also gave them advice. All of the members of the Conclave had their own Padawans and were active members of the wider Jedi Order, as mentioned before. And actually, even though they didn't really care about their other Jedi duties, their presence on Taris greatly improved the quality of life and stability of the planet. And this generally happened wherever the Jedi were deployed. Jedi Padawans were usually sent out to collaborate with local law enforcement, and of course this was a terrific deterrence against petty crime and banditry. The Conclave members actually secretly hated having these Padawans because they were seen as like kind of a distraction from their true purpose, which was to look outwards at the unknown region and also, hopefully come up with Force visions that would warn them about an impending Sith invasion. On one mission to the neighboring rogue moon, a final trial for their Padawans before they obtained knighthood, the Force seers all had different visions at the same time, with one unique theme. Each Jedi Master saw themselves being killed by what they assumed was a Sith wearing a red environmental suit, the same suit that all their Padawan were wearing on this mission. Now, normal Jedi who weren't in a secret cult like the Jedi Covenant probably would have, taken these visions and brought it to their, higher-ups in the High Council so that they could get more advice on what exactly they were seeing. But this group of seers had been waiting for years looking for the Sith. One could argue that their obsession blinded them from reality. Plus, Lucian Dre was there, and he was definitely the most extreme out of the group and was willing to be very ruthless when it comes to fulfilling the mission of the Covenant. The death of his father was a pretty big deal. It kind of made his mother really obsessed with, detecting all of these future Sith invasions, and so she didn't really take care of young Lucian. And so Lucian grew up kind of angry and frustrated about life. And so Lucian immediately suggests that the Jedi Masters killed their Padawans then and there to eliminate the threat. But the Seers are hesitant and they overrule him, and they decide to talk to his mother first, the leader of their organization, and see what she might suggest that they do. Great Dre, upon receiving information about these 4 visions, forbids the Seers from executing their Padawan, because that is an immoral thing to do. She understands that. Her strategy is instead to have these Seers bring their Padawan to her state, where they can kind of sit together and figure out what exactly was going on. Why are they having these visions? But Lucian Dre, fearing that such an action could lead to the death of his mother, relays a very different message back to the Watch Circle and tells the Seers to instead go ahead. Let's kill these Padawan. And so when the Jedi Masters return to the Taris Tower, they call all of their Padawan in for a meeting. That was supposed to be their knighthood ceremony. But no, instead it was an ambush. They managed to kill 4 out of the 5 Padawan that they thought were in their vision. One of the Padawan, however, Zane Carrick, arrives late to the knighthood ceremony and witnesses the horrific event, and he manages to escape just in time to the Taris underworld. The Jedi Masters of the Taris Tower frame him for the murder of his classmates, and the situation kind of spirals out of control from there. The death of the Taris 4, as it's known, dominates the headlines, not only on Taris but all throughout the galaxy. It's really a PR nightmare for the Jedi Order. For one, a lot of the people in the Taris underworld are terrified of this idea of a rogue Jedi, potential Sith, wandering around after killing 4 innocent Padawans. And one of the major employers in the Taris underworld, Losan Industry, actually decides to move their operations off-world, and that actually leads to mass unemployment, which creates a lot of unrest. At the same time, the local security forces were all diverted on a huge manhunt for Zane, leaving much of the upper city undermanned and underguarded, which of course the Mandalorians take notice of. Now, Zane Carrick manages to uncover the Jedi Covenant conspiracy, and eventually that news spreads all across Taris. Everyone is shocked that these Jedi Masters slaughtered their own Padawan. I mean, this really destroys the legitimacy of the Jedi Order. I mean, this was an order that was trusted. There were no checks and balances to their power. People just believed that they were moral and disciplined, and you could kind of pay attention to other things as long as the Jedi are around to keep the peace. It was like a security blanket. Then suddenly it was lifted off of them, and everyone felt very cold and alone and scared and betrayed. And so the killing of the children outrages everyone. And on top of that, we have an increasingly difficult economic situation because of the retreat of Losan Industries. And then you have the presence of the Mandalorian fleet in the sector, which basically just turns the entire planet upside down. And it's at this time the Dantooine Council basically withdraws the Taris Tower back to Coruscant. So they shut down the Jedi operations while all of this unrest is happening as well. It's the perfect storm, really. Suddenly, Taris' defenders, their last great deterrence against the Mandalorians, was gone. Mandalorian Field Marshal Cassius Fett saw an opening. The Mandalorian fleet create a diversion in the nearby Vanquest system, which pulls away even more Republic assets from Taris, and soon after, the Taris siege and invasion begins. When historians talk about the Mandalorian Wars, they separate it into 2 sections. There's the before the Taris siege and after. The siege at Taris represents the first major attack by Mandalorian forces against a strategic outpost of the Old Republic. The Mandalorians would launch a full-on ground invasion of the planet. They would dismantle the local government, lay waste to much of the upper city, and repurpose it for military operations. The people of Taris were given a choice: join the Neo-Crusader ranks as soldiers, or become enslaved and work in one of the Neo-Crusader war factories. And I guess there was a third option: you could just get killed, right? The individuals that managed to escape went to the lower levels of Taris, where they were basically hiding from Mandalorian patrols all day, and also there was a growing Rakghoul plague down there that was making things even more difficult. Kind of starting to feel bad for the people of Taris, right? The Republic military finally became serious about engaging the Mandalorians. It was no longer about defensive maneuvers and strategic containment. The war was now in full swing. At the same time, the Jedi Order, reeling from the scandal in the Taris Tower, the Padawan massacre, as the tabloids were calling it, decide to sit the war out. One of the reasons is there are many members of the High Jedi Council who still remember the horrors of the Great Sith War. As you can see, it wasn't just the Dre family that was traumatized by that last conflict. The High Jedi Council sensed that the Sith were once again behind this new Mandalorian bloodlust. Remember, in the Great Sith War, the Mandalorians were also used as a proxy force to really distract and hurt the Republic and the Jedi forces. And so the Jedi High Council wanted to kind of wait out the situation and see what was actually going on. But as a result, an internal schism happens inside of the Jedi Order. A lot of the younger Jedi Knights actually want to get involved in the war, especially after the massacre of the Cathar, which had, happened many years earlier. A young, charismatic Jedi Knight known as Revan becomes a leader in this movement, and the fall of Taris now becomes the rallying cry for these people known as the Revanchists faction, and they would quickly join sides with the Republic military. Now, the Republic Navy in the sector was in a pretty bad position. I mean, they were reeling from the loss of Taris, which again was not just a economic hub, it was also like a strategic logistics hub, right? A lot of material, a lot of munitions was going through this one system, and now the Mandalorians controlled everything, and so all of the nearby sectors were also now at risk of falling, because if you can't resupply them, if you can't give blaster packs to the troops on the ground, the planet will fall eventually. The arrival of Revan was terrific news, and the Jedi quickly took leadership positions within the Republic military, and they soon started to turn the tide. With the Jedi's help, the Republic were able to hold the line and eventually push the Mandalorians back. But Revan and his Jedi had fallen directly into a Sith trap. The longer the Jedi fought against the Mandalorians, the more trauma and death they witnessed, the closer these Jedi became to the dark side. Finally, at the Battle of Malachor 5, Revan uses his fleet to lure the Mandalorians into one final confrontation. When both sides are engaged in battle, Revan uses a mass shadow generator which fractures the planet's core and causes massive casualties on both sides. The Mandalorian fleet is shattered, and Revan's transformation to the dark side is complete. The Revanchists would disappear into the unknown region, and the reason they give to the Jedi and the Republic is that they're going to chase and try to find the origins of the Mandalorian fleet. That's not true. What Revan was actually after was the true Sith Empire. He wanted to find them. And he did find them. A year later, Revan would return as Darth Revan with his apprentice Darth Malak at his side. They would arrive at the head of a massive fleet of warships and wage war against the Republic and their Jedi brethren. The resulting conflict almost drives the Jedi Order to extinction and opens up the galaxy to centuries of continued conflict, warfare, and chaos. It's crazy to think how one woman's tragedy, the loss of her husband, led to the creation of this organization which murdered children, Padawans, and that one singular event escalated the Mandalorian Wars into it turns it from an outer rim kind of thing to a galaxy-wide conflict, which leads to several more massive Jedi versus Sith conflicts. It shows us how important the Jedi actually are to the galaxy. I mean, the Jedi's actions have always been impactful, but it's when the Jedi fail, that's when they do the most damage, it seems. And in the case of the Taris Tower, the Jedi involved didn't fail because they wanted power. They failed because they destroyed the lofty image of an organization that in many ways was holding the entire planet together. Symbols like the Jedi matter. They bring hope and optimism, and that is a force multiplier for the powers of good. But at the same time, when you attribute so much hope, so much optimism to one organization, when you depend on them so much for your security needs in almost an unrealistic way, that becomes a single point of failure. That becomes over-leveraged, and that can lead to catastrophic consequences for everyone who is involved. There you have it, guys. That is the story of the Padawan massacre. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.